What's up, guys? Let's talk about tube amps. Let's talk about solid state. Let's talk about pedals. Let's talk about all of that stuff and more in this video here. The thing about tube amps is everybody and their mom loves them. The problem is that they're not reliable. They're just a pain in the ass. They're high maintenance. You always has to service them, and they just cost a lot of money, and you never know when they're gonna blow up. So uh, they're just a huge pain in the butt, you know. But a lot of people love them. I think personally they are the best sound you can get out of a guitar. When you crank the crap out of a tube amp, you are going to get the absolute best sound you can get. Maybe nowadays it may be slightly, uh, you may be able to get a better tone, if not just as good a tone, with a high profile digital amplifier like a Kemper or a Axe FX8 or something along those lines. But for now, tube amps are more or less the best sound you can get out of a guitar amp. The problem is they're just a pain in the ass unless you know how to do electronic work like biasing your amp, or you just like to shell out the money to service your amp or to, you know, consistently work on it. Personally, for me, uh, I like tube amps, but they're just a pain in the butt. And I like a guitar amp to be very consistent and low maintenance for me. I don't like to put a lot of work into my guitar amp. I also like consistency. Tube amps are, you constantly have to fiddle with the knobs in order to get your sound, depending on your different venues and different spaces, where a solid state amp more or less just stays the same. It demands less electricity. Well, maybe not electricity, but it's just very consistent, you know. And that's the one thing I love about it. You don't really have to worry too much about getting your sound out of the venue. The problem with solid state amps, though, is that you are definitely not getting the best sound out of your guitar that you can with a tube amp, and that's where I think hybrid amps come into play. Instead of having a power amp section where you have like big 6L6s or EL34 tubes, really the tubes that are giving you the power to amplify, uh, you get a preamp with the smaller tubes, which are usually 12 AX7s. I think that's what they are. Um, and these basically allow you to have a tubeish like sound and signal hitting your power section, which will usually be solid state with a hybrid amp, and you can really get a nice tone out of it. It's not as good as a fully cranked tube amp, but I think it's good enough, you know. And so I find myself when it comes to playing live or just consistently practicing, is to use a solid state amp or just a hybrid amp. Usually hybrid for live, and then I'll just use a solid state amp for practicing. But when it comes to like recording or anything like that, I usually go all digital. I may later start miking up some thumb. I may start miking up some stuff later on, and when I start getting into reamping things, and I think then I might, you know, start getting back into the whole tube game thing. I think tube amps are really on their way out, and I can see the Kemper Digital, that kind of technology more or less taking over, because I see there being less and less return with tube amps, as in value for the consumer, than I do with digital amplification. Um, I'm tempted to really just buy a Kemper now and that will be my live rig as well as the stuff I record with. Maybe in the near future, who knows? But I kind of just feel like waiting on and seeing what all comes out. Personally, the Kemper looks cool, but at the same time, it sounds great, but it looks like butt, live. I'd rather have a nice looking Marshall amp or something playing live, just for the aesthetics of it. Call me shallow, but that's the way. That's the way. I like it. I like good looking equipment. Anyway, back to the whole tube solid state debacle. Um, there's a lot of tube snobs out there, and I think a lot of these guys are really just nerds, more or less. And this is coming from a guy who is pretty geeky, but uh, when it comes to guitar playing, I'm more concerned with the playing itself than I am concerned with tone and gear and brands and all that stuff. Like, branding is great. It's a way to know what you're getting when it comes to marketing and business, and just being a general consumer. Like, when you buy Vans shoes, you're like, okay, those are some solid shoes. I'm gonna buy some of those. Or if you're buying a Marshall, you know what you're gonna get. You're gonna get that whole British overdrive sound to it. When you buy a Fender guitar amp, you're gonna get that sparkly clean type sound out of a Fender amp. That's the beauty of brands. But I think a lot of people go overboard when it comes to branding, and people really start treating it more or less as a religion and very dogmatic, and they want to play certain brands. They want to be a part of that brand, and I think to an extent that's a good thing. That's a healthy thing. But it can get to an extreme where you get so into something, into a different brand, that uh, it really becomes part of you and becomes like this toxic thing where you have to put down everybody else's brands. And I think that's just really not healthy. I think it's healthier to think of yourself as a brand and to be more into what you are doing, what you are playing, and what type of music you are creating than it is to really give too much of a crap about any other brand. Like, I see other brands as more or less just secondary to what you're doing, and I see the equipment I use more or less as tools uh, than I do being a part of something. Because for me personally, what I'm doing is uh, more important as a brand than what I'm uh, using. And I think this is a healthier outlook for a lot of people, but it's a growth thing. When you're a young musician, you're really into the stuff that your heroes used. You're like, okay, I like Marshalls. Like, personally, I like Marshalls a lot, but I could drop them at any moment if I wanted to, because uh, that's really the sound I like. But if something better comes along, I'll use something better. Like, I like the Black Stars. Maybe I use Black Star. And you can't get that Mesa Boogie sound out of Marshall too much, so you know you just use what you need to use. It's like a hammer or a saw or a chainsaw or whatever. If you got to cut down a tree, you're not going to be using a hammer to cut down a tree. You're going to be using a chainsaw. I'm kind of tired here. I just got out of the gym and I was thinking about this whole tube amp debacle thing, and it's all great, but it really just comes down to, like, how much value are you getting out of your equipment? Like, what do you value most? And for me, I personally value reliability more than I do sound, and I think that's why I I like solid state amps. I like hybrid amps. over tube amps, but I will say that tube amps are definitely up there in terms of sound. If you want the absolute best sound, it's definitely tube amps. Um, I definitely want to start recording later on with tube amps, but right now it's all digital, and I think digital is going to overtake everything in the future when it comes to guitar amplification, whether you want that to happen or not. And so, uh, well, that's about it. This is the video. Okay, you have a nice day.